Now in the last class we learned about the structure of heart. Okay, now the function of the heart is to pump blood around the body to all parts of the body through the blood vessels. Now, what is the blood made up of and what is its function? Let's have a look. See, if you take some blood and you put it in a tube and you centrifuge this, if you spin it at very high speed in a machine called a centrifuge, it will ultimately settle down into three different layers. It will separate into three different layers. The uppermost layer is called plasma, which is a golden yellow fluid. Clear? It contains all the dissolved substances like proteins, hormones, mineral ions and other things, glucose, amino acids, okay, all the soluble product. The second layer is a very thin layer, a whitish layer, which is actually made up of the white blood cells and the platelet, and a majority of the blood of the cells is red blood cells, of which you have about 5 million per millimeter cube of blood. Almost in one drop of blood, about 5 million red blood cells and only about 5,000 white blood cells. So it's relatively very small. Now let's see what these blood cells do. Okay, the blood cells, see, the erythrocytes is another name for the red blood cell, and these cells, they carry oxygen from the lungs to the tissues, and they carry carbon dioxide from the tissues back to the lungs. So they do both. So the function of red blood cell is to carry oxygen towards the tissues of the body and to carry carbon dioxide away from the tissue. So basically it's a transport system where gases are being transported. A lot of the carbon dioxide is also dissolved in the plasma and transported back to the lung, from where it will be sent into the atmosphere. Is it clear? Now, the platelets are not really cells, but they are fragments of cells. They are pieces of cells, and these play a very important role in blood clotting. You'll see when you have a wound, after some time the blood will stop oozing out. It's because a solid plug is formed in the wound, and that's called a blood clot, and that is initiated by the platelets. We'll see how it works. Okay, and the remaining cells are the white blood cells, these 5 types of white blood cells. Now the white blood cells are also called as the leukocytes or the white blood cells. Clear? And they have 2 functions. Now the 2 functions of the white blood cells are, number 1 is phagocytosis, where the white blood cells will search for bacteria in the body, and when they come across them, they will engulf them and destroy them. They literally eat them up. Is it clear? The other type of white blood cells produce antibodies which help to fight against infections. They will help the white blood cells, the other macrophages or the phagocytes, to actually find and destroy the pathogens in the body. And they have a memory. These other white blood cells, they have memory cells. So if the same pathogen comes in again, they will remember it and quickly destroy it. So you won't get sick from the same pathogen twice. Pathogen is any organism which causes a disease. That's why you see, if you get chickenpox once, you won't get it again, because your immune system, these white blood cells, can remember. They actually have memory cells which can identify those pathogens which have come into the body once, and they can destroy them quickly if they come in again. Is this clear? So, what is blood made up of? It's made up of plasma, white blood cells, platelets, and red blood cells. Red blood cells carry oxygen and carbon dioxide. The platelets initiate blood clotting. The white blood cells produce immunity, and they also destroy bacteria by a process of phagocytosis. We'll see how it works. Okay. Now, the plasma, many substances are dissolved in the plasma and transported throughout the body, like amino acids, proteins, and carbon dioxide also pass in the plasma. Okay. Now, let's see how a red blood cell works. Okay. Now, a red blood cell is biconcave. That means the 2 sides are concave and disc shaped, and they don't have a nucleus. That's why they take this disc shape and this biconcave shape. Is it clear? So it's not like a ball, but it's flat like a disc and caving in the center, and that provides a large surface area to absorb gases and a low diffusion distance so that gases can easily be absorbed. Is that clear? And inside the red blood cell, it is packed with something called hemoglobin. You know what hemoglobin does? It's the red pigment. It's what gives your blood its red color. Now what hemoglobin does is, hemoglobin, I'll write it as HB. Now hemoglobin combines with oxygen, okay, and it will form something called oxyhemoglobin. And this happens where? This happens in the lungs when there's lots of oxygen. But when the oxyhemoglobin goes to the cells and oxygen becomes less, then the reverse will happen. What will happen? Oxyhemoglobin will dissociate into hemoglobin and oxygen, and that oxygen will go to the cells. So where does the reverse reaction occur? In the tissues where there is less oxygen. Can you understand what hemoglobin does? How it carries oxygen? So in the lungs, hemoglobin will bind with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. That will be carried to the cells in the body. And when the oxyhemoglobin goes to the cells, it will dissociate. It will give away the oxygen. It will tell the cells, see, I carried this oxygen all the way from the lungs for you. You can take and have it and respire and get energy for your metabolic processes. Is this clear? Now the hemoglobin has to do something else. See, the other thing the hemoglobin does is the hemoglobin will combine with carbon dioxide. Where? In the tissues. When the blood goes to the tissues, hemoglobin will combine with carbon dioxide and it will form something called carbaminohemoglobin. Is it clear? And when this carbaminohemoglobin comes to the lungs, it will dissociate. It will tell the carbon dioxide, now it's time for you to leave the body. I'm releasing you now. You're in the lungs. Escape and go away outside. We don't need you anymore. Is it clear? So this happens in the... So can you see how the behavior of hemoglobin changes? When hemoglobin is in the lungs and there's lots of oxygen, it will become greedy for oxygen. It will easily combine with it. When it goes to the tissue and there's less oxygen, it will say, no, I don't like oxygen anymore. Get lost. I'll take up carbon dioxide. And it will bind with carbon dioxide. So it changes its tune in the lungs and in the tissues. It does different things. Its role changes. Good for us. Can you understand this now? Now this is what hemoglobin does. And this is the function of the red blood cell. Now sometimes, remember this, sometimes if you are living in a room where there's lots of carbon monoxide, now this is a very dangerous thing. If hemoglobin combines with carbon monoxide, it's going to form a very stable compound called carboxyhemoglobin. And carboxyhemoglobin will not dissociate and it will be permanently in your blood, and then the hemoglobin can't combine with oxygen anymore. And can your blood then carry oxygen? Will it be able to carry oxygen? It won't be able to, and you will die. It's carbon monoxide poisoning. And it's very dangerous because carbon monoxide has no color, no odor, no taste. You wouldn't know you're inhaling it. Suddenly you'll feel dizzy and you'll pass out and you'll die. It's a painless death. Can you understand this? You'll feel a little breathlessness and that will be the end. Many people die in their sleep out of carbon monoxide poisoning. They wouldn't even know. So can you understand the implications of this? What hemoglobin does, where it is present, and the role of hemoglobin in the transport of gases. Is it clear? Next, let's look at the role of white blood cells. Okay? Now, the white blood cells are of two types. One of them are the phagocyte. The other is the lymphocytes. Is this clear? Now, what the phagocytes do is, see, suppose this is a bacteria. Okay? Now, what these phagocytes will do is, this is the phagocyte. Okay? It's a big cell. Now, this phagocyte, when it comes across the bacteria, it will form an invagination. Its cell membrane will fold inwards. And now the bacteria will start to be engulfed. It will start to feed on the bacteria. And you know, ultimately what will happen? This bacteria will be eaten up by the white blood cell. It will go into the white blood cell. So the bacteria is now trapped inside. Clear? And then the white blood cell will use its enzymes. It's got some enzymes inside the cell. It will use its enzymes and it will completely destroy the bacteria. So bacteria is broken down. And this process is called as phagocytosis. Phagocytosis literally means cell eating up bacteria. Is it clear? Now, what do the lymphocytes do? The lymphocytes make antibodies. Now, what will antibodies do? See, what the antibodies will do is, the antibodies will make, see there are many bacteria, right, in the blood. Now, if the white blood cells, if the phagocytes have to feed on these antibodies, on the bacteria one by one, it's going to be a very slow process. Now, see here, these pink structures which I am going to draw here are the antibodies. What are the antibodies actually doing here? Can you see what the antibodies are doing? You know what the antibodies are doing? The antibody has got hold of the bacteria, and many antibodies have now made all the bacteria clump together. The bacteria are not free anymore. They've been restrained by the antibody. And you know what will happen now? See, this end of the antibody can bind with, you know what cell this is? A phagocyte. And the whole cluster of bacteria can be engulfed all at once. So what do antibodies do? They help the phagocytes to actually engulf lots of bacteria all at once. Rather than eating them one by one, the antibodies help the bacteria to destroy lots of bacteria at one time. Instead of eating one grain of rice at a time, which is going to take ages, you can now eat mouthfuls of rice. So you can finish it quicker. Do you understand this? So do you get the role of white blood cells? Okay. The next thing is plasma. Now see, what does plasma contain? Plasma has water, mostly water, and it has amino acids which will be carried to the cells to make proteins. It will have glucose which will be taken to the cells to make energy by respiration. So amino acids will be used to make proteins. Glucose will be used for respiration. It will also contain carbon dioxide which can be transported from the tissues to the lungs and then released from the blood. Okay. They will also have lots of mineral ions which are used by the cell for conduction of nerve impulses and other things. So the plasma basically is a transport medium. It carries all these substances throughout the body in the blood vessel. Is this clear now? What blood is and what it does? Now finally, the last part is blood clotting. Now let's see what happens in blood clotting. See, if you have a wound, okay? So first of all, there's an injury. And if there's an injury, what will happen is the platelets, you remember I told you about the platelets? The platelets will release something called thrombokinase, which is an enzyme. And this enzyme will now, in the presence of calcium ions and vitamin K. Now students very often mix this up and they wonder whether it's calcium or whether it's vitamin C or D or E. Remember cake. C-A-K. Calcium ions and vitamin K. Now you know what will happen? This thrombokinase will convert something in the blood which is called prothrombin into thrombin. And it's a chain reaction, okay, a cascade of reactions. And then the thrombin will convert something called fibrinogen, which is also in the blood plasma, into something called fibrin. And fibrin is insoluble, thread-like. It's like fibrous. Is it clear? And this fibrin will trap red blood cells. It will form a mesh on the wound. It will trap red blood cells plus platelets, and it will form what? A plug on the wound, which we call as a blood clot. So you see, if this is, let's say this is the wound, let's say this is a cut in the skin. Now blood will be oozing out from here, right? Clear? When this clot forms, when the fibrin forms, the fibrin will first form a net over the wound. And then blood cells and platelets will get caught and the wound will be completely sealed up. So this is what we call as the clot. Now what's the benefit of the clot? Number one, it reduces what? Blood loss. You know, there are some people on earth who have something called the bleeding disease, the royal disease, because it was first found in the royal family. It's called hemophilia. Their blood doesn't clot. If you prick them with a pin, they will bleed to death. Can you understand this? Because their blood doesn't clot. Secondly, the clot prevents germs from entering the body. Can you understand this? And thirdly, it helps in healing of the wound because new cells can form in between the clot and heal the wound well. Can you understand the benefits of this? Any doubts, any questions on the components and the functions of blood? Anyone? Okay.